welcome to a session with Danny Wilcox Frazier. As you know, this is a part of a 7 Insider program, and it is a program that we started with the outbreak of the pandemic as a way to mitigate the effects of isolation. And I'm sure most of us are still under some form of lockdown or isolation or recovering and so on. And it is a project that is spanning across various platforms of 7 ecosystem, including 7 Foundation, 7 Agency, and 7 Academy. And most of it, we offer both free and paid content. Today's event is free. Obviously, you have to be registered. So I urge everyone to have a look at our calendar, which is getting populated by day, and make sure to sign up for anything that you find interesting. Now, often we speak about books, about concepts, about more of a aesthetics, ethics of what we do, but every now and then we do something that we call, let's call it a tech webinar, where a photographer speaks more of technical aspects of our profession. And we like to keep that separated because I think it harms conversation when if you try to cram everything together. So this is one of those times when we're going to talk about technique, technology, and feel free to ask any questions along those lines, or for that matter, anything that relates to Danny's work. As usual, we are recording this, so it will be available also as a recording. We are not streaming anymore on social media because we feel it's better to keep it this way. And as usual, feel free and please ask questions in a Q&A box. Don't raise hand because we prefer that you submit your questions in writing. So feel free to shoot questions as conversation continues. So today, title of this session is One Camera, One Lens, and Natural Light: the complexity of simplicity with Danny Wilcox Frazier. I will just make a small introduction. Much like Danny, I share very similar approach, although I should color and so on, but in the sense to keep things simple is something that I learned to appreciate. Although I never considered myself a purist in that sense. I don't really care how you take a picture and what's behind it, as long as it's something that you can morally defend. But in my case, I was my gear and my approach was minimalistic from the beginning for very simple reason, because I was poor and I couldn't afford anything else other than one lens, one camera, and one film. For that matter, it was usually, expired at the beginning. It was expired films, all kind of, mixed stocks of films and so on, basically anything I could get my hands on. But I think that was a bliss in hiding, so to speak, because it really forced me to think and about the frame and to move, because I was confronted with the limitations. In the beginning, I told those were limitations of the gear I had. And I think that's, in many ways, it's very important for younger photographers or those who are starting or those who are not entirely sure how to go about their photography. But to be clear, once the career sort of kicked off and I could afford cameras, I did go through a phase where I was trying to, purchase and get my hands on as many different cameras, lenses, and so on as I could. But in my case, I kept it as tools to experiment. And then fast forward 20 plus years, I'm back to, 1 or 2 lenses, 1 or 2 cameras. And now it's a bit more complicated because I shoot also video. So there's a separate set of gear, but the same rules apply in a way. And so that would be sort of, I'd say, a kickoff for Danny. So Danny, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm sure people would like to hear and see how some of the photos you took, especially for Driftless book, were taken. So yeah, Danny, welcome. You are in Las Vegas now. I'm in Sarajevo, and we have a lockdown coming up tomorrow. So Danny, the floor is yours, and welcome.
Thanks, Zia. Thanks to Gianna as well, who's behind the scenes for all of this. Really appreciate the two of you, and thanks everyone for being on the call. Zia, you made me think about my first camera. I ran track at the University of Iowa, and my girlfriend at the time, now wife, was taking a photography class, and I told her I want to take a photography class, but I didn't have a camera. I most definitely didn't have a way of getting one. So I went to my track coach and I was like, I want to take photography classes. And he he was shaking his head, and he said, as long as you keep your English major, I'll buy you a camera, because that was my concern. I was like, I have no idea how to get a camera. So I started with, like so many others, with that Pentax fully manual, the Pentax 50 millimeter lens, and just shooting Tri-X and figuring it out. So yeah, my track coach bought my first camera for me.
Yeah, my first camera was, it sounds flashy, but it wasn't. It was a Hasselblad with a fixed lens with an 80 with a 50 equivalent.
Yep.
But it was banged up, so the magazine was leaking light. Not too much, but
just the right amount.
Just the right amount. So I had to, to tape it. And actually, one of the pictures I took, which had very clear, like a light leak, but very ugly, I submitted to World Press, and it got an award. No one really wasn't bothered by this ugly, like ray of light coming in. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Now we have apps that have, been created to add that, and you just had it perfect from the beginning.
Yeah.
So I, where this concept really kind of comes from was when my wife was a grad student at the university. She attended grad school before me. I was working at a small newspaper, and it was during the development of digital cameras. So it was that time when the cameras were like, this big. They cost $15,000 each. Everyone, people's employers would hand them two camera bodies and tell them, this is worth more than your vehicle. So take care of it. I hope no one ever said worth more in your life, but these things were monstrosities. The quality was terrible, but it was the technology being developed. It was the digital revolution. It was, the mid and late 90s, and it things were exciting. They really were. But where it kind of started to change for me, I had my first digital camera. It was one of the Kodaks, the Canon version of the Kodak, with the crop sensor, but it was a good camera, and in comparison to the early ones. And I had just gotten my first Leica, so I had saved for years and years to buy an M6 and a 35 millimeter lens. And I was out just photographing landscapes early one morning, and this Amish boy kept riding by me. He was breaking a horse, and kind of trying to figure out what I was doing. I was back lighting ferns and just doing my normal thing, which I'm sure to someone just stumbling upon me looks pretty weird, laying on the ground, whatever. And I had my Leica that I was working on learning how to shoot with, and I had that big Kodak digital camera. The kid stopped on the horse and was asking me what I was doing. We started talking, and I looked at him. He's old order Amish, so the settlement near Iowa City where I was photographing, they don't want any photos, and I respect that. but I had the Leica around my neck, and I looked up at this. There's one
This
right
one?
there. M6 35 Summicron.
Yeah, that's the one.
So he's sitting there, and the light's beautiful on him, and I looked up at him, and I looked down at my Leica, and kind of held it up, and he shook his head, yeah, and I took 3 frames and put it back down. We kept talking, and I had this monstrosity, this Kodak digital camera on my shoulder. I was like, oh, I want to see what that looks like right away, because I can review it, unlike the Tri-X. Got to wait to develop that at night. And I started to pull that camera up, and he was like, no, 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 no. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. And I'm like, I just took your photo with this camera. And he goes, that camera is from the old world. That camera is new. I don't want you taking my photo with that camera.
Oh, I need to remember that. I need to remember that.
It was beautiful. It really struck a chord with me. So when I started on Driftless, and in the description of the talk, I wrote about this, and I'm gonna bring up some photographs now.
While you do that, let me ask you something. I have this feeling, which maybe it's a coincidence or anything, but I have a feeling that I wasn't a better photographer, but I was better image maker while I was shooting film. I have this nagging feeling that I was better at image making when I was shooting film. Do you have anything to add on that? I guess you understand what I'm trying to say. Do you have?
Yeah, for me early on, it was the crop sensors made things different spatially. Like I would have a 35 on, or 28, or whatever, standard of 50, and where I would be in proximity to people in my interactions, the distance that I'm comfortable talking with people at, that all of a sudden was like really disrupted, and I was forced to be back up, and which can be a great thing, but be closer to infinity. Everything, I wasn't getting the fall off that the bouquet that I wanted, and it was bokeh that I wanted, it felt so different, Zia. It really felt different. And the film camera, it was just so much more natural, and I liked the advancing. I liked the the waiting, holding for that moment, or just having that visceral reaction where I just hold up, pre-focus, and I'm just holding the camera, and somewhere as I'm talking or observing, and just fire the frame, because I'm setting the distance, and not even worrying about looking through the viewfinder, really just being as connected to the interaction in the moment. And I'll tell you the reason for that is I think it's somewhat, I guess you could say, selfish. I learn the best first person. So I have have dyslexia. I've never been someone who, does well in a traditional academic setting. But when I'm in the field and I'm interacting with people and I'm absorbing everything that's going on around me, that's when I'm able to, learn well. And that's what photography's always been for me, is this avenue to educate myself. And that's how I approach all my subject matter, which is, I'm not an expert. I don't know. This isn't my life. I don't know, what. I'm going in with the basic research that we all do, but I'm there to learn. And I was like, if I'm fussing with gear, and then I'm always thinking about someone reacting to the large gear, it gets in the way. So for Driftless, I just wanted to put all those conversations about, I was at an institution where, there was a lot of battles within, academics were fighting back and forth on whether film should be taught anymore or just digital. And it's just, these conversations made no sense to me. There were people who were really pushing the documentary approach forward. And that was what I was interested in. And I was most interested in storytelling, visual storytelling. I didn't want to sit around and debate megapixels and what was the, I know the best way for me to learn was in the darkroom, but that doesn't matter. That might not be what's right for someone else. That's just what was best for me. And if people are interested, then they should figure out how to, learn all these different aspects and approaches but being caught up in that debate, like, just didn't work for me. So it was also, it was a conscious decision of, I don't want to be a part of that, in industry, commercial and ethical, or not ethical, but ideological, basically combat. That's what I was feeling at the time it was. So for me, it was just about leaving all that behind and just going and learning as much as possible. And let me see if this is, am I sharing?
Yes, you are. Yep.
Okay. So can you see the whole photo?
Yep. Yep.
And is the
full screen?
Okay.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, my screen, whoop, sorry about that. My screen, is there a problem with is there a bunch of banding in the photograph?
No, it looks fine. It looks perfect, so relax.
Okay, I'm sorry everyone. The screen of my computer is just, in the last few days, has decided to start to die. Very new Macintosh, so obviously I have trouble with all forms of technology, Zia.
No, it looks fine on this end, don't worry.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Harry and Helen Phelps. So during grad school, I started Driftless, and one of the, the project was based on this idea from our at the time Governor Tom Vilsack, the brain drain of Iowa. We were number 2 in the nation, in the United States, for states losing, their single, well-educated, fluent adults were just fleeing the state. So our best and brightest were moving to the right and left coast, places like Chicago, et cetera. So I wasn't concerned about following those individuals. I wanted to document what was happening, in the communities that were being most impacted by this rural flight. I met Harry and Helen on election day in 2004, and I was at a one-room schoolhouse, and Harry walked in, and Helen was with both of her hands holding on to his right hand. And I remember everyone in the room kind of stopped and took notice of Harry and Helen and said hi. And at one point he saw me, and I had my Leica, and I looked down and looked back up at him, and he shook his head, yeah. So I knew it was okay to photograph he and his wife, I assumed. They voted together. He helped her vote in a single voting booth, and it was just beautiful. I followed them out and asked Harry if I could talk to him. He said, "Wait a minute, please," and he helped Helen in their car, and he turned around. He's like, he said, "I just want to let you know my wife has Alzheimer's, so that's why, I was helping her vote." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Thank you for letting me know, but this is what I'm working on. I'm looking for a farmer who, whose children all moved off the farm, and some of the workers had explained to me that that the poll workers had explained to me that Harry and his wife lived alone on a farm nearby. That's all they said. They didn't say anything about her health condition. So I went out I asked, Harry if I could come out to the farm and meet him and talk to him about the work I was doing. And I went the next day, actually. What happened then was it really has changed everything that I do in my work, which is reemphasize, this idea that we are being given a gift from our subjects, and them sharing so much of themselves is what I have worked really hard to always honor. And again, it's a privilege to be there, but it's also a responsibility. And I just can't get over like anything else coming into that space and interfering with it. Not saying that I don't care about exposure or focus or composition. Of course I do, but I want that to be as backgrounded as possible. It really is about the interaction. So where that comes from is Harry and I were talking at their kitchen table, and Helen was sitting. I didn't know how advanced her Alzheimer's was at the time, but Harry asked me if I would stay in the house with Helen while he went and watered his cattle. And I was like, of course. And he got up and left. And as soon as he did, Helen started wailing. She walked into a corner and was wailing in the corner. And I was like, Helen, it's okay. It's okay. I thought maybe she was scared of me. And I ran after Harry and told him, there's a problem, Helen's crying, and he stopped working and he looked at me and he's like, Danny, I wanted you to feel what every day of my life is like. And that was every day. Helen would when he would go out and work, would become distraught, and the confusion of Alzheimer's, and we went back in. He comforted Helen, and I then was just focused completely on this love that Harry displayed at all times. This just delicate, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Not every frame here is some of these are just really low res scans. Didn't even make it to the point of a work print, but it was always focusing in on that relationship and working just with natural light, the stress of it, and how I was photographing was, I was watching someone taking care of, a loved one, a spouse in this case, who is, they're losing themselves. They no longer, you're losing them as the caregiver, as the husband or the wife. And just to try to bring that out, I was of course saddened and uncomfortable at times, rightfully so. Harry and Helen were very poor, part of the elderly working poor of, this economic giant that just disregards so many people. That is the United States. I remember I wanted to photograph Henry preparing dinner, and he just numerous times he was like, no. And then finally he gave in, and it was just because it was such a humble meal that he was embarrassed. He was embarrassed. And I just always, Zia wanted to bring that out and stay true to that. And again, not every frame here is, in Driftless, there's just a couple frames of Harry and Helen, but it was just working with the camera in a way that at times it was just so much more about being in the moment. I mean, I have to admit, I think Harry just loved having me around just to talk. And most of the time I wasn't photographing. I was just there listening and hearing their life story and hearing, him telling me why he told all of his kids to go and get jobs in the city because there was no future on the farm. This is someone who started organic farming back in the late 80s because he saw all that was going wrong. And but the death of this farm, no clothes on the clothesline. I went back several, a couple years after. I mean, I had visited other times, but after Driftless was published and then the documentary came out. But everything on the farm was dead but Harry. When I went back, and no cattle, he had to sell off the cattle. All the cats had died, and it just, it's always about that feeling. Here's a moment where he's helping Helen take her medicine. He's making sure she takes it. So kind, so gentle, just so much to learn. Just, I mean, if for me it was just being able to see what love is in those latter the twilight. It was beautiful.
Can I just jump in with, because we have questions piling up. So my question is first. So obviously you're showing us work that is personal, which ended up in a book, later is a film, and so on. And I'm just curious, how much do you adapt your way of shooting? And by that, I also mean choice of your gear when you're shooting personal projects like this one, and when you are, I don't know, shooting corporate or something like that. How does that work?
Yeah,
from a technical point of view.
I'm on a commercial job right now, and I headed to the job with a large amount of gear yesterday, and honestly, I needed to use a DSLR on that shoot, but I shot entirely with one. Almost, I'd say 95% was one DSLR with 35-1.4 on it. That's commercial shoot where, there were some images where I needed macro. There were, a couple situations where I couldn't, firearms, I couldn't get as close as I normally would. So used a 50. That's my super telephoto. There is that stuff on a commercial job, but honestly, I was, even it doesn't matter if it's my personal work or I want to move around. I want to take it, the entire scene in. One of my early editors, he explained his style as happy feet. Cartier-Bresson said the dance, and I always remembered happy feet, not to be like jumping around, but to make sure that you're moving around a scene and seeing it from all directions and watching the light. And if you're way down with so much, or thinking about like changing a lens or zoom, like, am I going to zoom in or, that for me, like just really gets in the way. Maybe it's my inability to multitask. I like to hyper focus and on what's playing out before me, and then the interactions. I mean, I see commercial work as an incredible opportunity to learn as well. You go into businesses and you're able to learn from business experts, how they've innovated and created jobs, and it's so I don't want to get lost in gear. If I have to, I have to. But that's typically when it's a mix of stills and motion, which I, just like you, I do as well. Then your job is to direct, and you have people who have incredible skills, and your job is still that interaction, but you have to be on point with everything else, and that's another unique challenge that I quite love.
So there's a question from Mark. Sorry to jump in with questions, but I'm afraid we
Yeah.
won't have time, so I'd rather jump in with questions now. So Mark Silverberg is asking, he's saying, actually, the intimacy you capture of their situation, referring to images you just show, is deeply moving. How did you cultivate the relationship leap from where you met them to be invited into their home? It feels like the key unlock the potential of the relationship and project.
I was invited. I mean, I know, obviously, it's figuratively, to really be invited in. Literally, of course, we're at the kitchen table right away. But the camera was sitting on the table. And my small bag with film was sitting, down on the floor. So it's time. It's always time, and it's I think if you're there to learn and you're not there to subjectively tell someone's story, if you approach it in a way of, I don't know what it's like. I was raised surrounded by farms, but and just the idea of when, Harry telling me, I told all my kids to move up. This is, the day after we met at the one-room schoolhouse on election day. He said, very early in our conversation, I told all my kids to leave the farm, and just that isolation and when you're there to absorb and learn as much of that and then bring it out in the photographs the best you can, I think that's what opens that door to, being people being so comfortable. This is Harry just helping Helen take a nap. I mean, she was fidgeting, agitated, and he's exhausted too, because it was 24-hour day care. She wanted to die at home, and he wanted her at home, and she did, but it was exhausting. And I'm sitting on their bed, and Harry and I were whispering at the time, but this photo, I'm just holding the camera and just, look through focus, but I just had my elbows and really slow shutter speed. That's why, it was way down there. There was hardly any light in this.
And along those lines, how do you know, it's a question from Gerard, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing well, Seguia. How do you know when you're done in making photographs? In a particular case, for example, with this couple.
Yeah.
And was there a time when you had to go back to your subject because you felt that your story wasn't done? This is continuation of the question. So how do you know when you're done?
That's, we can address that when we get into the Cowboy John, because that's
okay. Let's move on then onto this. Yeah, let's move that.
Hey, can you hold that one and
Sure.
we'll talk about that. So I'll move through this stuff really quick. And I think what I'll do is, this is, so another part of Driftless is I spent time with the Miller family, New Order Amish family, 9 children. They hunted every year, in Iowa to basically to harvest most of their protein for the year. So they would pickle the meat, the deer meat. So this was like, shooting 30 plus deer a year. So it was, it was a lot of hard work. So I'll just go through these quickly. This was a single day. So it was opening day of shotgun deer season. There are, it's not just the Miller family, some friends and were along as well, and they would drive deer and then shoot them. And, and it was the same. I had, headed out with just the Leica and the 35 and a bag of film. And, it ended up a blizzard that day. And I'm not going to talk. I'll just show these real quick.
So just the technical stuff. Were these scans from the negs, or you printed positives and then scanned the prints?
They were scans from negative.
What's your usual workflow?
Yeah, it was all work print early on in the dark room, but I knew I needed digital scans, so I would make really low res scans, and then I would make work prints. Of course, I made contact sheets and edited off those low res scans, then high res scans for the keepers and work prints. So, and I mean, and that when I say keepers, I don't mean like final. It was what I was going to work print, because I knew I'd want a high res of that. The scanner at the time was a Cano scan. I mean, these were almost no dynamic range, like really low end, low quality, just kind of like that. Starting out with that K1000, that was my first scanner that I had.
Sorry, go on. Sorry, go on with photos. I just wanted to.
Yeah. You want to?
Okay, so let me just. So there's something, maybe it's technical, but it's very interesting question from Chris Pope. So he's asking, how do you not let a surprising technical problem, like you go into Harry's bedroom and it's way darker than you thought it would be, not get you frazzled and have your emotions ruin the moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because we're all going to be thrown in situations. But again, I did everything to, just to stay true to the lighting and in a situation. If in Driftless, there's a party scene late at night at a farmhouse, and it was, it also was extremely dark, and and I was pushing 400 to 1600, and it still was, ridiculously slow shutter speeds. And, I'd just do anything. I'd hold the camera, I'd put my elbows, I'd do anything to try to steady the camera. But then also I would at times just not care and just photograph, because it stays true for me, 3, 4 in the morning, everybody drinking these gosh, I can't even remember what they were called. It was Jägermeister and Red Bull. I don't even know what the heck. It horrible. Keep you up all night, and you aren't going to remember much. I had one of them as well, or two, but I wasn't going to keep going the way everyone else was. And, so for me, it's like, that's what the moment is. And it's chaos, it's blurry, it's mistakes, being made, or, people doing exactly what they want to do. And, it's just, it's honestly, I almost didn't care because I just wanted to be there and understand this feeling of neglect, this feeling of, no hope, joblessness. What are young people in their early and mid 20s, what do they feel in these economically, depressed places? And that, us from small town Iowa with the same issues. I got lucky. I got out. Not that I, don't have some fond memories of back home. I do have a few, but mostly the opposite. So that's playing out as well. But honestly, it's just kind of giving into the situation. The low light's the low light, and I just give into it, and I think for that then came out with as honest of work as I could make of Harry and Helen.
Along
I love the
those,
questions. That's great.
yeah. So Phil is asking, he's first saying that Driftless is one of his favorite photo books. And here's his question. First, you capture incredibly intimate moments of people who are probably not used to having photographers being around them. Beyond more minimal gear being less intrusive, how do you gain, you partially answered this, but I think it's worth the question. How do you gain that personal trust that must be important to you? And second question, which is not photographic, is what was your track and field event? Because his daughter ran for Hawkeyes about 10, 12 years ago.
Oh, go Hawks. I was a half miler like my father. My father was a half miler at Iowa as well. I was nowhere near as fast as my dad. And definitely nowhere near as fast as my two kids at anything. But the first part of the question, just
how do you gain that personal trust other than obviously being very, not so intrusive with your gear?
I think something that's also really important, just not being focused on the process of photography or using a phone and posting on Instagram, just being fully immersed and present in the experience that you're having with your subjects. Often like young, subjects, who are, of the phone generation, they're on their phones all the time, and that's fine. That's their life, and I'm documenting that. And but for us for me, like being so concerned with that stuff would, I just felt it was at times disrespectful. So it was conversations, and then I think the probably the best part of our best way for me to answer the question is share of yourself. People, I'm not saying dominate the conversation. You shouldn't, but over the course of years, if your subjects don't know who you are personally, and that's a weird relationship. And people know all the good, all the bad, and no different than them sharing all that with me, and with people who view my work and take it in.
So why don't you catch a breath? There's a question that I will first answer, and then I'm sure you have something to add. So it's our own Justin McKee. So he's asking, you have both touched on it, but has the new technology led to bad photography getting better, but good photography getting worse? I don't personally look at it that way at all. I just think that the new technology really democratized.
Yeah. No, you got it.
What's the right word?
Yeah, democratized. Yeah.
Democratize the medium. Absolutely. And so I think
Mhm.
today there is no more, the photography is definitely the most democratic medium ever existed. And I
Mhm.
think that's obviously positive. Now, obviously with democracy, always, there's always,
It's messy.
yeah, exactly. It's messy. So what we have, what the main byproduct is not the question of quality of photography, but I think the real issue and flip side of the coin is the amount, the volume, the sheer volume of photography that we are
Yeah.
exposed daily, right? I think in the last few years, people shot more pictures than ever in entire history combined of photography. I think someone came up with
Yeah.
those numbers. You can
Yeah.
Google it. I mean, it literally, like within a year, there was more photos shot than in 100, nearly 200 years of photography before. So, and that creates a problem because we are facing a sea of noise.
Yeah.
And what's really becoming difficult is seeing through that noise and navigating through that noise. So I think that's the real challenge. And but just to be more to answer your question, Justin, more specifically, I actually think from technical point of view, photography is better than it was because uh, digital makes it easier for people to take technically correct images because it's instantaneous. Algorithms do half of the work. Tools we have for free as well, not necessarily paid tools. The softwares make a huge difference. So in that sense, I think average quality of the photography went up. But I wouldn't agree, and especially, I don't know if you people saw WordPress photo results just came in yesterday, so have a look at it. I don't think this volume that exploded of images taken is actually resulting in better pictures. I don't know if that makes sense. So just the fact that
Yeah.
WordPress now has 250,000 submissions doesn't make that selection of 100 whatever 20 pictures better than 20 years ago.
I think it's, the last I saw, it's over 3 billion photos uploaded a day worldwide. And I think the most important, individuals we, in regard to visual storytelling, visual communication, the people we need are curators, editors, to sift through all of that. But it's also the responsibility of photographers, to have clear intent, to have a stronger voice, and it needs to be ever present in your work, and those are the conversations, like when I work with students, that I like to have. I just don't care, as long as you're transparent with how you work. I love aspects of the new documentary that are challenging our approaches, and they're just brilliant young photographers doing beautiful work and impactful work, and the world's better for it. I just, if you are more consumed with any aspect in the story you're telling, for me, you're lost, and you're part of all that noise that's out there. So it's that laser focus on the story, on on your subjects. I mean, we have I think there's a lot of turning the camera on ourselves. I understand the pandemic early on, that there were reasons for that, but it's been a trend, and I don't think that photographers' lives are always all that interesting. Sometimes beautiful imagery, but for me, it has always been about these social issues, things that are a part of who I am from childhood on. issues I care deeply about: wealth consolidation, lack of access to, to things that I consider human rights, healthcare, um, you know, clean drinking water. And, I've worked in Detroit where, the city is turning off people's water because they can't pay. I mean, the UN, a commission that works with the UN came out and, said, look, city officials in Detroit are withholding a basic human right, clean drinking water from poor people. These are the issues. And if you stay laser focused on that, I think, and use all the devices, use whatever camera. I do agree with you, Zia, that digital, being an educator as well, that digital speeds up that learning process. That does not mean that someone's going to develop their own unique way of seeing, and most importantly, a strong individual voice. Those are what I care most about developing. Students who work with me, if they have a technical question, I can pretty much guarantee I can answer it. And if I can't, if you stump me, I have numerous friends who I absolutely 100% guarantee I can get it answered. So that's, that stuff, it's just mandatory. It's like asking a quarterback if they understand the playbook. It's like, of course you gotta, American football, of course the quarterback has to know the entirety of the playbook. That's absolute. Like, I care more about those who are engaged in issues that go beyond, just themselves or their life circumstance. They want to learn about those in their communities. Yeah, most of my work is about, home, the Midwest, the Great Plains. That's when I'm most connected to people's work.
Let me just change gear here quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Marotta is asking, the moments are all very personal. Have you ever stopped because the moments were too personal or too intrusive?
Yeah. So during Driftless, I can answer that. Yeah. There are two situations, but I'm actually going to talk about John Newman. So John, this is Tabitha, John's longtime girlfriend, and their son Stetson, sitting, and this is a friend of Tabitha's, family friend, who comes out and stays on the ranch. So John, in summer of 2019, took his life. And I got the call. I was teaching a workshop in Missouri. Tabitha called me just, hours after, and told me the news. Suicide's very personal to me. It's something I dealt with as a kid, as a teenager, with a parent, and then personally too. So this was something that stopped me in my tracks, and I had to complete the teaching. I had a couple more days, 2 or 3 more days, that I don't even know how I got through. I was in communication with Tabitha. My wife's a therapist, in communication with her, trying to figure out, how to get help for Tabitha and some friends. And then I immediately, when it was over, I headed up to South Dakota, and I didn't photograph. It just wasn't right. Tabitha did on the last day, so I was just there a couple days. I cooked a big meal. She had friends staying with her. A good friend of hers, Mackenzie, was staying with her and helping with Stetson, and it was extremely tough for Tabitha. The details of that night are some of the hardest things I've ever had to hear, and knowing what she went through, knowing what John was going through. But you know, she did ask me to take some photos of her and Stetson, and those, they're not for anybody else, you know. But we did decide that I would continue to photograph, and I want to share something else. So while on the road working, McKinsey sent me a note and let me know during the horrible cold spell that we had. I believe it was officially a polar vortex across the United States, North America. McKinsey wrote, and Tabitha and her boyfriend Clay, who lives with her now, and Stetson's trailer burnt down during that cold spell. And fortunately, I talked with her, and everyone was safe, but they lost everything. And it's just it kind of just sometimes takes your breath, like when people just continuously are dealt such a difficult hand. And our job, Tabitha and I had decided that I would continue photographing, to bring Stetson, and his childhood into the work. And I'm so grateful to her. And and we're going to do, hope something in regard to Prince in the future. Please stay tuned. Figure out a way to help. There are other ways we can help with our work, and that's where I want to take it. So.
And there's a comment from Andy Alexander who says, bottom line is that it comes down to relationships and being willing to be open and connected to the individuals and their lives. Deep and thorough curiosity. Anyway,
yeah.
The question was that. But anyway, so what are we looking here?
Joyously, drunkenly aware. I can't remember all of Miller's quote, but yes, aware, being, just not allowing any distractions. Again, this could just be, some people could be fine with it. I'm telling you what I have to do. I shared, I have, ADHD, dyslexia, like, traditional learning models are terrible for me. And, distractions are horrible, but, those of us with ADHD, like, we also have this, superpower of being able to hyper focus on things. And sometimes it can be overwhelming because it never shuts off, and you're reading everything that's going on in a situation, and body language, and analyzing every word that someone says. And yeah, I'd like to be able to probably relax more often, but is what it is. You utilize the tools you're given, and it is about relationship, and earning, that access through, all the different, it just comes down to, it's not going to work with everyone. Zia, like, I know, that, like, you meet people, you photograph, there isn't the connection. It's like, that's fine. Like, there's no reason to worry about it. I mean, that's what, like, assignment work, you have to come back with and I'm so fortunate. I have the most amazing editors. People like Mark Merman, and early on, Marianne Golan. It's just like people who have given me so much freedom. Stacy Clarkson, who, was the first person to give me an assignment and say to me, just go do what you do. That was it. That was go to the oil fields of the Bakken oil field in North Dakota, and during the oil boom there at fracking. And she's like, go do what you do. And that's an incredible freedom. And there's so many more. I mean, I'd have to just sit here for 5 minutes and say, and they're incredible. They make it possible because, Lost Nation, a decade-long body of work that will be out eventually in book form, is, it does have some of that work mixed in. Getting sent places and just being given the freedom to work how I work.
So where we are now, this is now square format. So can you just, and it's flash or some sort of artificial light. So can you?
Yeah. So, I started out Lost Nation working in the Badlands of South Dakota, one camera, one lens, just the Leica. And, honestly, I showed the work to a photographer who I have great respect for, her and her work. And it was a comment. She was like, "Oh, this is great. It's, you're just picking up where Driftless left off, or Driftless ended. You're just continuing exactly the same thing." And I was like, like that wasn't going to be enough. So I started working with other formats, and most people, like, they use other formats to to force themselves to work differently. But for me, I was like, I got to figure this camera out technically so I can again work exactly the same as with that, like with that rangefinders and 35 millimeter lens. So this is a Mamiya 6, and I started using, I bought a Vivitar because my ones from way back with the Pentax were all broken. And I started using the 285, flash, manual flash, and but it was really it was, again, just having that, and not wearing single lens on this. And all I had, the ultra wide, and just being able to work situations. This was a machine gun shoot in the Badlands of South Dakota. So that's a Barrett 50 caliber sniper rifle. Those are 50 caliber rounds in that ammo can. I actually fired the gun as well. There was a fully automatic 50 cal, a Browning 50 cal, belt driven, and it was a party, booze, guns, but just, again, change the format, doesn't matter. Here, this is like a S2. So medium format digital with an ultra wide, again, using that manual flash. A blizzard had just started coming in and into Teddy Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. And, and this bull was not happy with me. I was inside my vehicle. All the bison were on the road. So I had to try to work through, and they will, I had a little Toyota 4x4. They will, do a lot of damage if they get angry enough. But I was kind of just creeping along, had the window down, and as I'm still moving, just had preset and focused out the window. So, it's all that the years of just working in that way, that then it doesn't, it just really doesn't matter what's in my hand. I'm still gonna, as much as possible, just react and work to bring out, the intensity of a situation in that regard. This is a little point and shoot, a Contax T3, just in western Nebraska, and in a county that had lost, like well over 80% of its population in less than a century. So almost everyone had left. And this a gentleman took me to his farm. His parents, willed the farmhouse to him, and he was like, it's, he couldn't go live on the farm. that he was raised on. He had a job in this small community as a janitor at the local high school, in these consolidated school districts that kids sometimes travel, hour and a half by bus to school one way. But he said, you can go photograph what's left of the farmhouse that was left to me. The land was still farm, but and then this is the Hasselblad X-Pan, a horse race during the Oglala Lakota Nation powwow. And it, again, just, I decided I wanted to work with Pano, and I worked the entirety of the horse races with the Pano. So, I have a bunch of, when I was doing this work, I had a bunch of formats on me, but I always just, the panoramic, the X-Pan with the standard lens on it, and that's what I was working with. And it was about, moving physically, and again, always seeing it from all angles, and not trying to figure it out through equipment or some kind of app.
We have more questions that we can possibly fit into our time slot, but there is one interesting question by Philip Jackson, slightly different, but I think it's interesting. He says, you describe the way you work with stills as capturing it as it is, yet it seems your video work is the opposite of this, controlled and directed. Is this dichotomy difficult for you to manage? It seems to me that photography and video are completely separate skills. Would you agree?
How I approached Driftless, yeah, I agree with the comment. I don't think that has to be the case. Even if you're working with large equipment, I think, we can look at Streetwise. Of course, Mary Ellen Marks still photographs, then followed, by the documentary film made by her and her husband, that was shot, I believe I'm correct on this, 35 millimeter film. There was the intimacy, felt very much like the still photographs too. And it's, one of the, in my opinion, I mean, that's one of the most important bodies of work. When I started, still to date, I use it when I teach. It's just, it's incredible. You think of Farmers' Wives, Sutherland, you think of Iraq in Fragments. I mean, they're films. I have a good friend who, John Lowenstein, who uses DSLRs, and Carlos Xavier Ortiz, it's just beautiful. And it does feel very seamless. Now, what I wanted to do with Driftless was just get out of the way and allow my subjects to, in their own voice, tell their story. I found, a fog of war, like, just boom, here you are. Not that of course Errol, does plenty of verite and as well, but that interview style with McNamara, that was, it's just incredible. And that, some of those are points of reference, and I agree. I have made short films that are handheld, and I studied under Leighton Pierce, an experimental filmmaker, in grad school. And I did a lot of handheld experimental stuff, and I loved it. It informed my still photography so much. But that isn't what I was doing with Driftless. That's that's spot on. That is.
I would just add that. Let me just read what exactly he asked. In regard of differences between that the photography and video are completely separate skills. That would be one way to say it, but I think it would be too simple to say that way. I think a lot of photography skills are applicable to video. And if you look, so many good videographers are also good photographers. And
Yeah.
actually, just to be more specific, so many photographers are good videographers. I think the main difference is that video or film, motion film develops over time, right? And unlike pictures, who are sort of single individual frames. And I think that's the biggest obstacle from when you're switching from video, from stills to video. And also, photography is largely one-man endeavor in most cases, especially what we do as documentarians. I think with video, sure, there are some examples where people do everything: shooting, editing, directing, but usually it's a teamwork. And because it also involves audio, not to mention audio, and not to mention editing. So I think because of that, videos tend to, they're more of a collaborative medium.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that adds up on your question.
Yeah. I mean, Driftless, I had a team. I had a camera operator, sound person, and so we were going in. I already had the relationships worked out. So it did feel more natural than it would probably have felt if we were working at times completely verite, but I also knew I wanted formal sit down interviews, and where it's still, there's the editing process, there's me asking a question, me making decisions, of techniques like giving space after someone ends their answer, giving space for reaction, mostly physical reaction, facial expression, body language. There are all these things that we do, but I really did want, Driftless, the book of still photographs, that was in a lot of ways my statement about my home, and staying true and honest to everyone's stories that I worked with on that. But I wanted this to, just for people to, and of course that can be done verite as well. And like I said, there's so many incredible examples of that. It's a great question. But I think I agree with everything you said, Zia. I think people can, you should just see them as tools. I teach now where, students do both. They have to. They're required to do both within the department that I work with. So it's,
Can we just to wrap this up? First, I would apologize because we didn't get to answer all of the questions.
You want to do like maybe a really quick rifle, sorry, bad choice of words, but speed answer.
Oh, there's way too many. I can, we can aggregate them for you, and then maybe if you have time, we can reach out or something.
I am sorry.
That's okay.
We did not
so
answer.
just one thing before.
So
that's okay. Just before we let you go, so can you just tell us what's next in the pipeline? And I believe you still have some copies of Driftless left, so we should. People, if you want to get a hold of the few remaining copies, we will post a link to the website where you can get it. Gian will do that in the chat box. And so so what's the next in the pipeline for you?
I have 300 rolls of film in my freezer that are the official end to little over a decade's amount of work on Lost Nation. So it's, looking at the impact of depopulation across the Midwest and Great Plains, and this photo is a part of the photo on the screen's part of that body of work. I've been given that deadline by my wife. She's like, process the film, get it done, and it's time to start the long process of editing all of that and production and you know, finding someone to partner to get it out into the world finally. But the work's been out, different forms here and there, and you know, so many people have supported it. You know, Sarah Terry and the Aftermath Project, and it's been part of one of her, you know, incredible yearly books. And well, and then some of the photos were in the large collection, the larger book. So you know, it's just putting it together, Zia. You know that long process.
Yes, I do. Thank you, everyone. Make sure, again, sorry for not being able to catch up on all your questions. Thank you, Danny, for your time. Everyone be safe, and make sure to check the rest of the goodies we have on 7 Insider website, and make sure to sign up for it. Take care, everyone. Take care, Danny.
Yeah, thanks, Zia. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being on.
Bye.